Hey guys, I'm going to be resuming talking about STMRs, and this time we're going to start working on STMRs from NeoVision base units. Originally, the idea of this kind of video was for me to give you some ideas about what may be worth using unit of choice tickets for, so you can pick up some STMRs. It's obviously not an option for NeoVision's base units, but it could still be useful to talk about the STMRs just in case maybe you've got 3 copies of a NeoVision base unit and you're not sure if you should STMR mogul some of the duplicates before sharding them to get multiple copies, etc, etc. For the 7-star units, I did skip over all the collaborations and limited times because the list was huge. There's only a couple limited time NeoVision's base units, so I'm going to go over the limited time NeoVisions as well. So, I thought the 7-star review would take 30 minutes. It ended up taking 3.5 hours all told across multiple videos. So this may end up being a multiple video series for the NeoVision's base units as well. We'll see what happens. Let's get going, starting from order of release for NeoVision's base units. Now, the wiki does have a little bit worse off filtering. I have no way to filter out the shift forms, which makes the list a little cluttered. So I may skip over some NeoVision's bases by accident. If I do accidentally miss a unit, let me know in the comments, and then I'll cover that in a future video. Or if the videos are done, I'll just do a pinned comment to discuss them. Anyway, NeoVision's Cloud was our first NeoVision's base unit, and his STMR is Master of Fate. Now, people probably know at this point, Master of Fate is amazing. It is one of the it is the highest source of physical true double hand in the game. Many NeoVision's units have 200% innate double hand, and you need 200% more to cap out. This very cleanly and easily caps out the rest of your double hand. Even if the unit has more, let's say maybe they have 300%, this still caps you out. At that point, you're wasting some stats. But even so, that's fine. I don't think there's any NeoVision's base, I could be wrong here, but I don't think there's any NeoVision's base units that are, naturally double hand that have less than 200% passive. So this will always cap you out, I think. This will always cap you out on your units. Obviously, if you're going true double hand on a unit that shouldn't be, or isn't designed to be, I should say, Tifa, Carton, or the popular ones, you're going to need more, but once again, more from a single slot is wonderful. So Master Fate, really great STMR. I definitely recommend you get multiple copies of this. I'm not sure the exact amount you should get. I personally made 3 of them. I find myself pretty often using 2 copies. I don't really use all 3 copies that often. I'm sure it has happened, and now that I think about it, it probably has happened a few times. But I would say a minimum of 2 copies, maybe as many as 3. Great STMR. One of the best STMRs from NeoVision's bases. So the very first one, super good. On the other hand, NeoVision's Reigns STMR is not good. Now it does it's not listed on the wiki. It does have an upgrade from the Season 4 story, which increases the base attack to 190, and the special passive is Auto Amplify to Fire. That's pretty much it. It's basically got just really nothing. The Auto Amplify for Fire is super low. You can always get that from an off form with Kuja's STMR or Spell Daggers from the old event, etc. So Auto Amplify Fire, I put very low priority on. So this is just a plain old generic after upgrade 190 attack power 2-handed greatsword. And while that is okay-ish attack power, still there's better out there. I'd even rather a lower attack power greatsword with killers on it or something, or LB damage or double hand. There's just way better greatswords out there than Reigns. Although it is completely free if you do the Season 4 story. You get Rain for free, you get his STMR mogul for free, so there's no reason not to have it, and definitely do not get multiple copies. The original Aerith's STMR, Final Fantasy VII Remake, hers is pretty good. It's, I believe, the highest magic clothing other than Clash of Wills. So for mages, I talked about this in the other video, so mages like Physalis that can't wear robes, this is a really great option. And even for normal mages, it does give 50% magical true double hand, which is really, really nice. You know, some mages only need like 150% more double hand, so you can do things like Aerith's Clothing and then a copy of like Kefka's STMR to get a lot more percent magic out of the deal instead of something like, we're going to get to it later, but like Paw's STMR that is just plain double hand. Or if your unit is, really low on double hand, a lot of Neovision's Awakened units have pretty bad passives if you're using them. They have low true double hand, except maybe they only have like 100% or something. So yeah, this is just really, really good overall. It's high magic, it's decently high spirit, and 50% magic true double hand. That being said, I still usually find myself wearing Shantoto's STMR for lots and lots of mages. Also, the Clash of Wills chess piece is a thing, and that is very, very commonly best in slot on mages as well. Evokers prefer things like Yuna's STMR or the new Lena STMR. And then there's actually even better robes out there as well, like Tiana's STMR. So even though Aerith's Clothes is pretty good, there's a lot of better options out there most of the time. So the only time I would really pick this over other stuff is if you very specifically need 50% more double hand. And that does come up sometimes, but I really wouldn't go for multiple copies of this one. Awakened Dragon Axstar's STMR is pretty terrible. It's a one-handed katana, and it does give true dual wield, and for whatever reason, it also gives true double hand, even though it's a one-handed katana. But yeah, it's basically 182 attack power and 50% true dual wield. You're never going to double hand this. So yeah, terrible, terrible. You don't want any copies. When you eventually get an EX2 Axstar, get a free copy, stick it in the vault, never use it. Maybe one day it gets a Chronicle upgrade or something, but until that happens, one of the worst Neovision's base STMRs, and there's a few bad ones too. That's one of the worst. Yoshikiri's STMR is 80% unrestricted spirit, so no requirements, and then 25% spirit true double hand. The spirit true double hand, it is really, really low. It's mostly going to be irrelevant. It does not work with shields. A lot of the more modern sources of true double hand do work with shields, and obviously for healers or tanks, you really want to be using a shield. So this is most of the time going to be irrelevant, or at best a very tiny bonus. On the other hand, 80% unrestricted spirit is really nice. So this is one that, it's good to have. I do use it in quite a few builds that need more spirit, but I don't think anyone really needs multiple copies of this. So again, just, eventually get your one free copy from EX2 Yoshikiri. I personally would not Moogle extra copies of this. The one copy's good. You're going to use it every now and then. But the fact that the spirit double hand is so low and it does not work with shields, I find that there's just way better ways to get spirit double hand these days. It used to be okay, because back when he came out, it was very, very rare to get spirit true double hand. There's like one or two sources in the entire game. These days, we got a lot more sources. Hey guys, I had to stop briefly, but let's go ahead and continue what we were doing. So next up is going to be Starlight Elena. Now her STMR, it's 150 attack and magic true double hand, which seems like, really great for double hand hybrids. The problem is double hand hybrids just either don't exist or are not very good. So for the most part, this is going to be just like a worse version of Cloud's STMR or a worse version of Paw's STMR. The exceptions would be when you're going true double hand on a unit that's not designed for it, like Carton or Tifa. This, combined with Cloud's STMR, can bring you 350 out of 400 to the cap on like Carton or Tifa. So it can see use in those scenarios. Even then, though, for the most part, I usually don't find myself using this that often, just because my typical setup on those kind of units is something like Cloud's STMR, and then something like either Riku's STMR or Nappi's upgraded TMR because of the attack power, and then I'll use things like accessories with a double hand, like Photon Core or Tifa's glove, stuff like that. I don't really use this one too often. As far as the magical side goes, Paw's STMR is just better for straight double hand. You've also got things like Kefka or Sarah's STMR, which can give you 100 double hand and like 60%, which might be better than 150 flat, or raw, whatever you want to call it. So this one, it does see use sometimes, but I don't think multiple copies of this is really a big deal. One copy is plenty. There might be some very, very, very rare scenario where you're looking for like 2 copies on the same team. So if you're worried about that, I guess you could just in case make a second copy. I personally, I do have 2 copies now that I think about it, but I don't think I have ever used 2 on the same team that I can think of. So okay-ish STMR, but not really high priority. Gabranth's STMR is, I mean, it's great. It's a really good physical tanking chest. It's 30% HP, 500 flat HP, 115 defense. So for physical tanking, this is definitely better than Wilhelm's STMR. It does have lower spirit than Wilhelm's. So if the fight uses physical and magical damage, I might find myself using Wilhelm's STMR a little more often. But for just raw physical bulk, this is probably the best tanking armor in the game. It's definitely really good. 1 copy should be plenty. I can't think of any scenario where you're running 2 different physical tanks. You don't really need a second copy of this. And even if you did need 2 copies of heavy armor for a tank for some weird reason, like I said, Wilhelm's STMR is almost as good. I really wouldn't waste an STMR Mogul on a second copy of Gabranth's. 1 is wonderful. That's plenty. Furion's STMR is a little bit amusing. Everyone went crazy about this. It was super popular because it's the best double hand weapon in the game. I myself even Moguled a copy of this when I pulled my first Furion. The problem is this was back before weapon imperils became really a thing. So it didn't really matter what weapon you used because this was just a really good two-handed weapon, one of the best in the game, because it does give you 50% LB damage, 100% true double hand, and then some bird killer, but that's not really too relevant too often. But yeah, it was one of the best two-handed weapons in the game. The problem is, after this came out, very shortly afterwards, weapon imperils started getting added to the game. So at that point, it became really focused on using a weapon to match your weapon imperil, and the only current bow imperil in the game is 10% from lock, which has a few problems. For one thing, 10% is terrible. Another thing is, Neovision's lock is just not the greatest, even though he does have that big defense break that's been kind of spread around to lots of units on global, so he's not as unique as he was on the JP server. Even so, it would still only be 10%, so it would usually be better going for a 35% gun or something. So, yeah, overall, Furion's bow, I don't find myself almost ever using this. I do use it a few times, very rarely, but sometimes I'll toss it onto a Chronicle battle team or something where you can't bring outside of the series units, and at that point you're not using any weapon imperil at all. So at that point, it becomes really good. Titus would really like this if no one's doing weapon imperils on a Final Fantasy X Chronicle. I did use it during my Final Fantasy Type 0 Chronicle against the Varja, because, Queen wore this because no one's doing weapon imperils in Final Fantasy Type 0. So, it's not worthless. It's definitely a good bow, and in the future, when Premium Darkfina comes to Global, and she brings the 30% bow imperil, this might make a comeback as a good weapon, but as of the current time on Global, just like the previous weapons or the previous stuff I've suggested, get your 1 copy from an EX2 Furion. I wouldn't really worry about moogling multiple copies. 1 should be enough for now, or even 0 for the most part. Madame Adele's STMR, this one, I did use it a few times in the past. It's a fist weapon, one-handed with 188 attack and 50% LB damage, and it also casts an auto attack buff at the start of battle. It's a one-handed weapon, so that's got a lot of problems. We don't really want to do dual wield for the most part. The only units that are still sometimes doing dual wield builds on Global are Carton and Tifa. Both of them love using fist weapons, so this can see use sometimes. The big reason I never use this anymore is, for one thing, Tifa maxes her LB damage for free. If you're using her accessories, her LB damage is already at the cap. Plus her card, I should mention. Carton doesn't use his LB, so the LB damage on this is completely irrelevant for the most part. The only 2 units that use LBs and one-handers don't need extra LB damage. And then the generic dual-wield build for Tifa or Carton is the Legend of Mana Fist in the main hand because it has good variance, and then the Dark Vision's Fist in the offhand because it has higher attack power than 188. So this really just has no use at all at the current time in Global. Once they bring the variance fix to Global, and all one-handers get good variants. At that point, the Dragon Quest Fist will probably never be used again because it has lower attack power than Scarlet Glove. And then Scarlet Glove might make a comeback as the second best fist, or actually the third best. I believe Marquis STMR is better than this. We're going to get to that later. That is a limited item though. But yeah, so again, 1 copy is plenty. Honestly, 0 copies is even better because you're just not really going to use this. Ibarra's STMR is limited. We're getting to the first limited unit, but we are going to cover those. So hers is a throwing weapon with 180 magic, and it gives 50% true dual wield. Before Tiana, I would have said this is worthless because, throwing weapons, and we don't want to use throwing weapons because there's no good throwing in peril. Lock does one, same problem. You're not really using Lock. Now that Tiana is a thing, this can definitely potentially see more use. The bigger problem is, not many mages are dual wielding these days, except for the evokers, and all the evokers, are using evoker stuff, not this. So this could see maybe some use on Diverti on his shift form, maybe. Although Diverti would again still rather his own STMR plus the Deck of Disquiet. It's a event item that's better for Diverti. So yeah, so I don't really find myself ever using this anymore. I did use it a few times back in the day, but it's just throwing weapons. And even though Tiana does exist, most mages these days are double hand. And if you're looking for double hand, wild card aces, TMR is just better than this as well. So 1 copy is all you need. I would not mogul for multiple copies. Saul Neovision's Rod or STMR is pretty terrible. It's a rod with 184 magic, and it gives MP regen. And at the start of the battle, it does a 200% magic buff. A few turns later, 250%. So this is pretty terrible. So it's a rod with no killers. The special effect is pretty much just worthless. It's not even that high of magic. It has nothing good like double hand or true dual wield. This is just one of the really, really bad ones, like Axtar's STMR. Probably never ever going to use this, even if you do get it for free at EX2, Saul, you're still never going to use that. Shoreline Fina and Daisy's STMR, on the other hand, is great. It's a spirit hat with 50% water resist, 30% HP, and it gives guts guaranteed once per life. This is great. This is super, super good. I think it's the only source of 100% guts in the helm slot. I know there's the immortal hat that can give an RNG chance of guts on the helm slot, but I think this is the only permanent one. It's really high bulk, really high spirit. It does give the water resist. So yeah, this is great. This is one that, I would recommend maybe consider making a second one. I actually have not made a second one. I only have the 1 copy. I never did mogul more copies. There's been 1 or 2 times I've kind of wished I had a second copy and I just didn't. But it was fine. I got through it. But this one I have a few times had a slight regret for not moguling a second copy of this before I started my phases. But still, 1 copy is going to be enough the majority of the time. It's pretty rare that you would want a second copy, but it does come up sometimes, mostly because of the guts. There's some fights where you kind of want to gear your entire party for guts for one reason or another, especially in the upcoming Death Machine trial. You're gonna have to gear your entire party in guts with re-raise, and that whole trial is dumb. But we'll get into that when it comes to global. Onion Knight Neovisions. Now his STMR is pretty terrible for damage dealers. It's a sword with 188 attack power and some resistance. So for damage dealers, this is worthless. You're never going to use this. But for tanks, it could matter. Same thing as Payne's STMR or Barrel's STMR. It's resistance in the weapon slot. So if you're doing a fight that just needs excessively high resistances, like Arbораlis from last month's Clash of Wills, this could see use, and I think it did see use by people during that Clash of Wills. So it's good. I wouldn't really moogle more of them. I think 1 should be fine. It's not really worth moogling a second copy. So it's very, very rarely good, but most of the time it's not going to really see use. And then Kingdom Hearts collaboration. These have 3 really good STMRs. So Kairi's STMR, it's one of those that's really great for slot compression and convenience, but not really like a super big power jump. Like you're not really going to regret not having this on like your best in slot builds or whatever, but it's just really condensed, a lot of effects. So 70% attack and spirit, 7% MP, 7 LB per turn, and 70 dark resist. So these are some really good effects. The 70 dark resist and 7 LB per turn are both very, very good. 70% spirit, great for bulk. 70% attack power, can matter. 7% MP. So yeah, this is just a really good all-around materia. I use this very, very often. Like I mentioned in the previous video, I like combining this plus Final Fantasy X2's Riku, Dagger of Justice, Dagger Mastery, I don't know, something Dagger. High class Dagger, that's it. Yeah, that caps out your LB per turn with two slots. It's just a really nice materia that if you have it, it's great. I use it frequently. If you don't have it, it's not the biggest deal. You're not really going to miss it too much. But it is really good in some scenarios, especially when that dark resist matters. It's really high dark resist. It's like the second best dark resist materia in the game, behind Infernal Souls. Riku's STMR. This is one that kind of recently has really come into popularity. When it first came out, people said Riku wasn't that big a deal and Sora was the prize, which was kind of true at the time, but now that forcing true double hand on lots of units is a big deal, this has become very, very powerful. It's 80% attack and 100% true double hand, and 100 true dual wield if you ever go true dual wield. So yeah, this is just two really powerful effects in one. This especially comes into play lots of times with Carton or Tifa when they're going forced true double hand. And I know I keep mentioning those two over and over and over. That's because both Carton and Tifa are pretty meta. You'll see them in lots of Dark Visions clears and lots of, you'll see Carton in a lot of Clash of Wills clears. And as we've discussed, forcing true double hand on units that are designed as true dual wield is always the way to go if you can build for it, which is not always the case. But assuming you have the option to build for it and still fit in killers, forcing true double hand is just always more damage than not double handing. And yeah, so 80% attack and 100% true double hand, really, really big deal. Percent attack power is a big problem for Carton and Tifa when they're going double hand. They struggle to cap their attack power percent. So 80%, huge. Guardian of Light Riku, absolutely top tier. If you have a second copy just laying around, consider moogling it. I would say 2 copies of this would be wonderful. I wish I had the second one. Sora's STMR is, again, really, really powerful. It's 80% attack power and 75% LB damage. Until tomorrow, when Chao is coming out, this was tied for the highest LB damage materia in the game, along with a few others coming up later. 75% was the most. We are getting a 100% LB damage tomorrow, but that's a limited item. Then again, so is this. But for attack power, this is great. So this is, this has a duplicate with Hawkeye from another collaboration. It's literally identical. But even so, 80% attack power, 75% LD damage, really, really powerful. Now that being said, I do find that I don't use this as much as I used to for whatever reason. Modern units just are easier to cap their LB. Either that or 75% is like a strange amount. Usually I prefer multiples of 50, and 75% is either under budget or over budget for the build I'm doing. So still great STMR. You want multiple copies if you own it, but I'm just finding that I use it a little bit less. But that being said, I still use it pretty often. And you can even use this on like mages. So mages that need, even though it's attack power, it's still 75% LB damage, which is still best in slot for some. Well, it was until Zoma. Zoma's better. We're going to get to that later. But if you don't have Zoma, this is going to frequently be, well, not best in slot because we're also getting Chao tomorrow. So one of the better options, I'll just say that. But then again, these are all limited, so they either you have them or you don't. So Faisal's Neovisions, her STMR is really, really good at what it does, but it's very specialized. So it's a 65 magic accessory, and it gives magical spirit killer, or fairy killer, spirit killer, whatever you want to call it. So I mean, if you're fighting a fairy on a pure mage, this is wonderful. This is going to be usually potentially best in slot, but that is hyper specialized. It's magical killer only. It's only for mages. Half or more of the mages either don't use killers or they use physical killers. So this is a very, very small amount of units that would actually use this. And even then, it's only 1 out of the 12 races. It is probably still Moogling a second copy because when it does matter, it's going to be potentially best in slot, and you might even want to be not dual wielding, but wearing 2 of these, 1 per accessory slot. So like for Tiana or like Sniper Physalis or some future mage, you could potentially want 2 of them. I did Moogle a second copy when I pulled Physalis, so I do have 2 copies of this. That being said, I don't think I have ever worn it not even a single copy ever. The reason is not because we don't fight fairies. It's just that, most of the time I'm using like a physical mage, like Yigni or Louise, or not me, but Angela is an example of a mage that would not use this because they don't use killers or they don't use magical killers. But even so, this is the kind of thing that you want to have it and not need it instead of need it and not have it. So consider Moogling a second copy, but it's such a rare scenario where you would use this. If you're low on Moogles, I wouldn't really sweat it too much. Neovision's Terra STMR. Now, this does get a Chronicle upgrade as well. The Chronicle is limited to 1. Even so, you might want to consider Moogling 2 of these, potentially, so getting a second copy. It's usually going to be best in slot on Terra herself. Now, Terra is falling out of the meta. Her damage is kind of behind, even after her Chronicle upgrade. It's still just not the greatest. It's still usable. She's kind of like on that borderline of being good and just outdated. But it's still okay. So it gives 50% evoke damage. At base, it's 190 attack. After Chronicle, or Magic, it's 210. And then it gives more passives to Terra only. Really good STMR. I did Moogle a second copy. I use a second copy very often. On Terra herself, pretty much is the only one. The thing holding it back a little bit is it is a sword, and the only sword users or sword evokers are Ferris and Terra. Ferris actually prefers her own STMR over this one, although I do usually use 1 copy of this on Ferris as well, even though it's not technically her best in slot. So, when Terra first came out, I would have said absolutely 2 copies must have. These days, Terra is not seeing nearly as much use. The only reason you'd really bring Terra is if you need one of her fields, and her fields can be upgraded to 40% through crowns. That's very powerful. Terra is certainly not power crept yet, but she is slowly losing relevance as power creep moves on without her. So, I don't know. I would say 1 copy is fine. If you have Ferris, and you get a copy of Ferris as well, then 1 Terra is fine. You can give the offhand to Ferris's STMR, or you can do things like the Dark Visions Rod, or an LB damage rod for Terra, stuff like that. There are substitutes, so while 2 Swords of Terra's might be her best in slot, I'm not even sure if it is anymore. I haven't checked Terra's best in slot build in a while. But, I would still say 1 copy is fine. If you want to be absolutely sure, a second copy won't hurt, but I would say it's lower priority at this point. Locke's STMR is, it's a throwing weapon with a lot of bird killer, 100% bird killer. So that's really good. It's an attack power throwing weapon. The big problem here is throwing weapon in peril. So Locke does 25% or maybe 30%, I forget. And then Tiana can do 30%. It's not going to be very often you're mixing Tiana with a physical team. You could in Clash of Wills potentially, like for example, if the Clash of Wills next month ends up being a bird, Tiana is still relatively recent, so she'll probably be able to come to that Clash of Wills. And then maybe this will be amazing. At that point, you might really want this for like the February Clash of Wills unit. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But again, kind of like Physalis' STMR, it's just really, really specialized. Also, it's a one-handed weapon, and we've gone over before why one-handers are just not good. So at the current time, there's really no one in the entire game that would want to use this. Even if you are fighting a bird, you're still not going to want to use a one-hander against birds. And there are throwing two-handers. For example, Waka's STMR or Yuffie's STMR, one of them, it gives double hand throwing weapons with bird killer. So that's going to be the way to go if you really do want a throwing weapon against birds. This one, I have it. I've got an EX2 lock. I have never used this, I don't think. So I would say, just get your free copy at EX2 and then be done. Eldrin, limit the time. His STMR is a sword with hybrid stats. It gives 175 attack power, 150 magic. It also gives 30% attack and magic. So it's a really good hybrid weapon, probably the best hybrid sword in the game, I think. Which is, whatever, because hybrids, who cares? Hybrids aren't good. But it also gives vitality absorption. This makes all the damage you deal life leech by 15%. This is one of those effects that it seems like it could have applications where it's really awesome, especially if you come from a background of ARPGs like Diablo, Path of Exile, etc., where life leech can just make or break the game. In Brave Exvius, though, being able to life leech is, at the current time, has always been irrelevant. And sometimes it's even a handicap. Like any bosses that use zombie, it's actually a huge handicap to life leech. As you know, with Louise during the Mortrim Clash of Wills. Like her life leeching by default was a big headache. But yeah, it's one of those things that someday, potentially in the future, it might be relevant. It has never been relevant until now. It still isn't relevant at the current time. I kind of wanted this for that just-in-case scenario. I actually did not get Eldrin during my pull, so I don't have this. I have never regretted it. Maybe it'll come up in the future, but hasn't yet. So I would not really sweat this too much. One copy I would say is fine. If you really just absolutely love hybrids and you want to make the best hybrid in the world, I guess 2 copies for Starlight Elena or something might be good, or Eldrin himself. But other than that, whatever. Lastwell Neovisions, his STMR is a clothing with magic and attack power. A little bit low on the attack power, but still. It also gives 50% magical and physical insect killer. So, same thing we've been saying about the other killer stuff. It's hyper specialized. It's only for insects. It is for both physical and magic, and it does have attack and magic on it. So very, very good. It is the chest slot, though, and we've talked about it before. The chest slot for mages, you really want to use Shantoto's robe, or you might want to use the Clash of Wills chest slot for magisters. This, versus insects, this will probably find a way onto your team. Would you need multiple copies? For an insect fight, you very well may want more than one copy to put on multiple DPS on Dark Visions or something. Insects are kind of rare. We do see them every now and then when they come up. You might want more copies. I personally did make a second copy. I moogled one duplicate of Lastwell, and then I got the one other copy at EX2 for free. So I have 2 copies. I think 2 is plenty. I've used this maybe twice ever. Because insects are just really rare. But of course, when they do come up, this is one of the really good killer sources for it. So it's 1 copy is probably fine, but you might really want 2 of them in the future. Maybe even 3 or more, depending if there's some really, really hard insect fight in the future. I don't know. But it's a good STMR. It's just really specialized. Rain and Phoenix STMR is a great sword with 100% LB damage on it. So this is very frequently going to be the best in slot for Neovision's Tyvis, the premium unit. The reason being, even though Tyvis's TMR gives himself more attack power because it gives him flat stats, having 100% LB damage on a weapon is just really high. And that usually frees up Tyvis's materia slots for more killers, not having to gear for LB damage. I'm not entirely sure how his gearing will change after Chao's STMR. That might make his own TMR better in some builds. It depends on the race. But even so, if you have Tyvis, or if you really like Tyvis and want to use him after off-bannering him sometime in the future, this is pretty often going to be his best in slot, depending on the enemy race. So that's really good. Other than that, no one else really uses LB damage greatswords like, Cloud could, but Cloud has his own Chronicle. Napi doesn't really use it. Napi doesn't use her LB. Her LB. No one else really uses great swords. So, whatever. But for Tyvis, if you have Tyvis or plan to eventually use Tyvis, great STMR. That being said, I would say one copy is fine. You don't really need multiple copies of this. Lastwell and Reagan's STMR is a katana sword. I'm sorry, a katana sword. I was looking at the graphic. It's a sword with Dragon Killer and 25% LB damage. So this is a really good sword against dragons, especially if you use your LB. It's 75% killer. It's physical only, which is it's a physical weapon, so that makes sense. The problem is it's a one-handed weapon, and we don't use one-handers anymore. But I have used it in the past. One-handed DPS were meta at one point in time. It was good for Lastwell and Reagan, but these days, even if I did use Lastwell and Reagan, I would gear them double hand anyway, and they'd have the same kind of gearing things as like Carton and Tifa. I'd be forcing double hand on them. I would not be using one-handers. So yeah, I would say one copy is fine. But again, same thing as all killers. There very well may be a scenario, distant future, where you really want multiple copies to dual wield or put on multiple units. I think one copy is fine. I only made one copy. I never moved any extras, and I've been fine with that. So good against dragons. The problem is it's one-handed. Charlotte and Physalis, this was a event unit. You can only get one copy of the STMR. It was given for free. We'll just review it very briefly. So it's a gun, 160 attack power, and it gives 30 MP and 3% MP per turn. The STMR is pretty trash. Yeah, it's just trash. You are never going to use this for any reason. If you're using one-handed guns, there are 101 better options. But it was a free STMR, so you can't really judge it too hard. Darkfina and Saul. Now their STMR is potentially decent. It's a rod with 198 magic. It also gives 50% true double hand and 50% true dual wield. So if you're doing a dual wield build and you need more true dual wield, this could be one of the options. Usually I would probably rather gear for like a killer rod if one exists, depending on the race. But if you're fighting a race that doesn't have a killer rod option, then this might be a good option to free up your accessory slots. Instead of using Ravenheart, you could use something like Heliotite or the Cursed Doll, etc. for just higher flat magic. This does have 198 magic, which is pretty high. It's not the highest in the game, but it is pretty high. And then for double hand builds, honestly for double hand, I would probably try to go something like Dark Vision's Rod and then get double hand in other slots. But it depends. It just depends on the unit, depends on the fight, depends on your gear availability. So this is a fine STMR. I do use it every now and then, but I would say one copy is fine. You don't really need multiple copies. It doesn't see a ton of use, and when it does see use, like one copy is more than you need. It's good enough. Shuiyi's STMR, the unit not being upgraded tomorrow. Her STMR is a rod. It's a two-handed weapon. It gives 183 magic, 140 spirit, and it also gives true double hand, spirit, and magic by 50%. So for spirit users that want to take advantage of a rod in peril, for example, Neovision's Cetra Aerith, if she's doing like Holy Reflect, she can do 35% rod in peril, and you're bouncing back Holy. This is going to be the best in slot because it's the highest spirit rod in the game. If you're using staff in peril, then you're going to want to go with staffs because they have higher spirit. For magic, it's just straight up worse than the one we just reviewed, the Dark Visions or the Darkfina and Saul rod. That one's just straight up better for magical double hand because it's higher flat magic. That being said, it is a two-handed rod. In the future, JP adds variants to mages, and then two-handed mage weapons become the only good option. With that being said, at the current time, right this minute on Global, the variance on this is either bugged or overlooked or intentionally doesn't have variance. It's only got one-handed variance, even though it's a two-handed weapon. Now, I'm not sure if Gumi is going to fix this when they make the variance patch for Global. They may fix this, or they may not fix it, and they may leave it at one-handed variance. It feels like a bug to me. If it's not updated during the variance patch, I'll probably send in a support ticket and say, you overlooked this, you didn't fix it. Whether they fix it or not is yet to be seen. But if they don't fix it, then this is going to be just worthless during the double hand meta because it won't have good variance like the other two-handed rods will. But if they do fix it, this will be amazing after the variance fix. That being said, mage variance is like between 4 to 6 months away from global, so that is not coming anytime soon. No rush for this. Axstar and Cleome's STMR. It's probably the best two-handed katana in the game for just general purpose. Auron and Sephiroth rather their own personal Chronicle katanas. But for everyone else, if you're going with a two-handed katana, this is usually going to be your best option. It's 207 attack power, it's double hand, and it gives 50% LB damage and 50% human killer. So basically, it's just the highest two-handed katana with LB damage in the game for general purpose. If you don't have Sephiroth's his Chronicle weapon, it was time limited, and if you don't have it, well, it's gone. This is going to be his secondary best in slot. As far as Auron goes, his Chronicle can always be UOC, and so that's not time limited. But yeah, and if you're going katanas on a different unit, like maybe Titus or Sky or something, this is going to be the best option in the game for general purpose units. So definitely want one copy. Maybe 2 copies in really, really rare scenario. Probably not, I would say, unless you don't have Sephiroth's personal Chronicle weapon. If you missed that, then you might want 2 copies, one for Sephiroth and one for your secondary katana user. If you do have Sephiroth's special Chronicle weapon, then this is fine. Then 1 copy is all you need of this. Savior of Souls Lightning. Now, once upon a time, I would have said make all the copies possible. Because this was the chain cap up. Chain cap up goes on nearly everyone. Even if the unit does have true dual wield, you still want to force double hand on them. So the chain cap up was just important for everyone. That being said, now that we have 2 Clash of Wills pieces, the Magister's hat and the Magister's the Magister's helm and the Magister's clothing. This is a little bit less important. You still want multiple copies. I would say at this point, 3 copies is all you need. In the past, I would have said as many as 4 or potentially 5. Nowadays, I would say 3 copies is a good number. You do want at least 3 because this goes on nearly everyone. Either this or one of the Clash of Wills gears. 9 out of 10 Neovisions units these days come with the 5x cap. So you have to add the final 1x from something, either Clash of Wills or this STMR. So you definitely want 2, absolutely 3 of them, more likely. I would say 4 and beyond is excessive because Clash of Wills does exist now. Mazurka's STMR is the highest attack power two-handed spear in the game. It does have the bad variance. As you see here, it's 1.25 variance. It's the worst in the game for two-handers. That is being fixed in the future, so it'll get better later. And it's got 100% jump damage. So currently, right now, this is the best two-handed jump spear. That being said, the Chronicle weapon for Kain can be used by anyone, and that has more attack power and more jump damage on it for everyone. Not just Kain. Everyone gets more attack and more jump damage on Kain's two-handed Chronicle. That's coming out really soon. So this, 1 copy is all you need. I would not mogul multiple copies. Using multiple Dragoons in the same team is extremely rare. So honestly, Kain's Chronicle is going to be all you ever use 99% of the time. If you are using a second Dragoon, 1 copy of Mazurkas is all you're really going to need. Solitary Patron Snow's STMR is a one-handed fist with defense and spirit and nothing else. As far as spirit goes, it's the highest spirit fist in the game. Some tanks, like Snow himself, can only use a very limited weapon selection. So this is going to be, his best in slot for magical tanking. For physical tanking, Aphmaw's STMR is way better. It's a physical fist. We'll get to that very soon. But yeah, so this 1 copy is plenty. When your Snow eventually gets EX2, all you need is the 1 copy. There's no real reason to have a second copy of this, I don't think. So yeah, it's just very plain, high defensive spirit, and yeah, and it has no attack power. So if you are using this just as an example for a physical defense scaling DPS, like Maeve, for example, is doing like, her finishing damage or something, this has no attack power, so it gets completely gutted because of the logarithmic formula. That is being fixed during the variance patch, but it's not here yet. Ferris Neovision, now her sword is like a slightly worse version of Terra's. It's lower magic, and it has 50 Evo magic, which most of the time, this is easier to gear for, so it's less valuable. Although for Ferris herself, she was intentionally designed with lower Evo magic, so she really likes this, and she'd actually rather dual wield these. And it does have a Chronicle upgrade that makes it, a lot better. Becomes 180 attack and 210 magic. Actually, I'm now realizing I said Eldrin's STMR was the best hybrid weapon. I didn't realize Ferris's Chronicle sword had such high attack power after being chronicled. So this is actually the best hybrid weapon for hybrids, because it has the highest attack and magic combined. That being said, it is Evo magic, which again is only really useful on Ferris. Terra has really high Evo magic but low Evo damage. So Terra wants her own STMR. Ferris wants her own STMR. And then the other evokers don't use swords. So again, I would say one copy is plenty. Get your one copy, chronicle it. And then if you're using Ferris, then either use Terra's sword in the offhand or use like one of the good rods in the offhand. There you go. One copy is good. Venera's STMR, time limited. If you don't have it, it's too late. But it's, not the vision card. We want to go to the STMR. This is great when it matters. So it's 50 LB damage, 30 evasion, and 70 attack power. So as far as just LB damage and attack power, obviously Sora or Hawkeye's STMR is way better. But the evasion, if you're building for evasion on an LB damage unit, this is probably going to be best in slot. I did use this on Sephiroth during one of the Dark Visions that needed evasion on the whole team. Also, I think on one of the Clash of Wills that needed evasion on the whole team, I used this on Sky, and it made capping her LB damage with evasion without any real loss to her damage very easy. Yeah, so this is amazing for LB damage dealers for evasion. Also, just for tanks, it's a 30% physical evasion materia, which is just all by itself very, very good. Kaito's is overall better for tanks because it has resistances on top of it. But you can stack it. You can stack Fallen Moon plus Kaito's and get 60% in 2 slots. So yeah, so if you have multiple copies of Venera, I would say a second copy of this is good. It's a really good STMR. I don't use it a ton just because most of the time you don't need evasion on your damage dealers, and for tanks, I do have Kaito's. I've got a lot of tank evasion gear like Durandal, etc. So I don't really use it as often as you would think, but when evasion matters for your damage dealers, this is going to be like a lifesaver. It's super good for evasion plus LB damage and attack power. Melia's STMR is a staff with true dual wield spirit. It's 170 spirit and 50 true dual wield and 15 HP. I forgot about that. So if you're dual wielding a spirit user, this can be a good option. It is just strictly worse than Biggs and Wedge's STMR or Zzat's STMR. Those are both 75% spirit true dual wield, and they have 180 flat spirit. But that's a gun and a flail or mace. Those are much harder to equip or items. Also, they don't have the good spirit rare enchantment from Item World. So if you're looking for a staff that does true dual wield, this is the only option, and it's really good. But again, I would say Zzat is overall the best true dual wield spirit item if your unit can wear flails. If they can't, this is going to be the second best. And then the worst would be Biggs and Wedge's gun, just because the item world on guns is attack power, no spirit. You can't get high HP or high spirit through item world on Biggs and Wedge. But it does give more true dual wield. It gives 75%. This is only 50. And it gives 15% HP as a bonus. So this is Overall, pretty good. I don't really use it a ton, honestly, just because, true dual wield spirits builds are not that big a deal. And then for DPS units that would use it, like Louise or something, I usually stick on ZZ's STMR. So I would say 1 copy is fine, but 2 copies could be good. 1 in each hand, you're getting 100% true dual wield. Could be nice. Milo's STMR is a little unfortunate. For one thing, it's a little bit lowish on the magic, only 180. It does give 50% LB damage. LB damage mages are pretty common, but a lot of times you're going to want to use something like the Dark Visions Rock that's really high magic, or you're going to want to use something like Shantoto's Chronicle. Shantoto's Chronicle, it's a TMR, so it's very, very easy to get. It's just better. It's just flat out better. It's higher magic, same LB damage. And yeah, so the only time I would really use Lazy Rod is if you're gearing like multiple dual wielding mages for LB damage. That scenario is like super rare and has never come up for me. I have 2 of these. I did Moogle a second copy, kind of like this is a great option. I ended up like never using this, so that was a big mistake. Learn from my mistakes. Don't Moogle more copies of this. Get your 1 copy from EX2 Milo, and then that's it. It's just the flat magic is too low, and there's just more options. Not to mention, if we sometime in the future ever get Medina's Neovision's Awakening, it's like super late at this point, but supposedly it's coming. Her STMR gets upgraded to be just way, way better than both this and Shantoto's, and that you can get multiple copies. So if we ever get Neovision's Medina's Awakening, you will never ever see this used again. Next is Cobalt Blade Noctis. Now his STMR is great. It's again specialized. It's 50% undead killer on the chest slot, but it also gives 100 jump damage, which is really, really nice. 50 light resist and really high attack power. So this is used pretty often by me for multiple reasons. One thing, it's the best attack power light resist clothing, which is really good, and I'll sometimes use it just for the light resist. It's all actually, I think Blue Mage Fina's STMR is better now. That's kind of recent. It's still really good though. Reaper Killer is relatively rare, and having it in a chest slot can be really good, especially in Dark Visions or Clash of Wills where you're gearing your entire party. Usually the Clash of Wills is better. I've said this before, but if the Clash of Wills chest slot is in use by another unit and you're gearing for Reaper Killer, this is very, very often going to be on all the secondary DPS that are not wearing the Clash of Wills chest slot against a Reaper. That being said, it is a single killer, so it's only relevant if you're fighting Reaper, which is only 1 out of the 12 races. I would say not that common, but it feels like Reaper's been pretty common recently. We've gotten quite a few Reapers, like back to back to back in the past. Like we had Mortarum, we had Anima. We're getting Kokuryu from the next Dark Visions is also a Reaper, so we've had a few in the past, a few coming up. Yeah, it's a really good STMR. Where's Arden? Shouldn't Arden be? Oh, he's coming up soon. Okay, we'll get to him in a moment. King Behemi. King Behemi's STMR is great. If you're gearing a physical tank, this is almost always going to be best in slot in one of the materia slots. It's 40% unrestricted defense and 100% true double hand for defense. Yeah, most of the physical tanks have somewhere around 200 to 300 passive true double hand or less for older tanks. Some of the older tanks, especially the Neovision's Awakened physical tanks, have none at all. That being said, if you've got Behemi's STMR, why are you using old physical tanks like Gladiolus? But anyway, yeah, it's slot efficient. It's powerful. It's going to be best in slot on pretty much every single physical tank if you own this. So yeah, get it. I wouldn't say multiple copies is a big deal. You could stick it on support units and bulk them up if you need to, and that very well could be very, very useful on some fights, especially Clash of Wills. Is very well known for dealing damage to your party. It could matter. You might want more copies. I personally didn't. I made 1 copy, and that was enough for me. and I only put it on the tank. But it's a great STMR. You want a minimum of 1. That's probably enough. Luna Freya's STMR. This one's a little bit of a strange one. It's a rod with 178 magic and 50% evoke damage. So that's the same thing as Terra's STMR. So the thing is, while this would be amazing for like Luna Freya herself, the problem is she has 2 copies of a basically free Chronicle weapon that is just better, just way better. It gives her tons of flat magic, it gives her stats, etc. Yeah, so she's always going to use dual-wielded Chronicle weapons. You know, Terra wants to use the swords, Ferris wants to use the swords, Diverti can't use this. So the only evoker that could potentially want this is maybe Lena. I'm not extremely familiar with Lena's best in slot. I probably should look at it one day so I can, you know, speak with more authority about her best in slot. I don't know what it is. If I had to take a guess, I would say Lena's probably going to rather something with higher magic and maybe LB damage, like either Shantoto's Chronicle Rod, or maybe just the Dark Vision's Rod, and get her stats elsewhere. I don't know her best in slot. This might be her best in slot. Even so, I think 1 copy of this is fine. I wouldn't Moogle second copies personally. It might be best in slot on Lena. I don't know. But I would say probably 1 copy unless you're a big Lena fan. Arden. So Arden is basically just like a version of Noctis. So instead of light resist, we have dark resist. Also really good. Dark resist is usually more useful. And then, you know, same jump damage. And then killer versus human. So the problem is humans are super easy to gear for. Human killer, most common in the entire game. That being said, this is still a great source of it. Because, you know, it's a pretty high attack power chest. It does give resist. And it gives human killer on the chest slot. So that might free up your materials for other killers. If you're fighting, like, you know, so let's say a human plant, or a human beast, or a human aquatic. You know, you can use your materials for those more rare exotic killers and get your human killer from the chest slot. So great STMR. I made 2 copies. Don't regret it. I've used 2 copies multiple times. Also a great dark resist item. So yeah, it's really good. I would say 2 copies is fine. You probably don't need more than 2, but you know, it's up to you. Edward and Alfonsi Elric. So this is an accessory with a lot of resistance on it. It's got 50 to 4 different resistances, and it gives him flat stats, but he's kind of, or I'm sorry, it gives him mana reduction. I haven't used them in a while. Yeah, so Elrics are kind of out of date, so it's kind of like whatever. But yeah, it's an accessory with 45 attack and spirit. It's really low, but it gives 4 resistances at 50%. So if 2 of these resistances are in play during the fight, and you don't need like an omni-resist STMR like Awakened Rains, this will usually be best in slot for your tank or even your DPS units. If you're gearing for like Dark Visions and you got to make your DPS immune to the elements, this is a really, really slot efficient way to do it. If you're fighting like, you know, Water and Lightning, that's 100 combined resist. It's really good. If a boss uses 3 of these or even all 4 of these, it's you know, really good. I personally made 2 of these when I pulled for Elrics. I don't regret it. I have used 2 of them in builds before. It's high resistance. Yeah, I'm glad to have 2 of these. I would recommend 2 of them, especially because he is a limited time unit, so you're not going to be pulling any more of him in the future. Lightning Fast Sedaine. Everyone knows this one. This is a materia that gives you a song. So the unit is going to be singing for 5 turns, and then on turn 6, it gives the entire party on that turn 300% off stats and 300% LB damage. And the unit singing the song can also act and perform and contribute on that turn. So this you've seen in tons and tons of strategy videos. It has made an appearance in just about every single rank 1 Clash of Wills team ever. No, Morgana was too slow. There may have been 1, maybe 2 bosses where it wasn't Gene, but this is almost always on Clash of Wills rank 1's team. It's also pretty much always on Dark Vision's rank 1 teams. except for the Dark Visions that have to be killed in 4 turns or less, like the past 2. So the last 2 Dark Visions, we haven't really seen this because it's been, killed by turn 4 or 5, and that's too slow for this. But any fight that goes to turn 6 or beyond, you are almost always going to see this in action. Now, that might not be the case going forward as 300% LB damage buffers does become more common. We've already got a few on global. Roka can buff that. Coastal Frisia can buff that. So there are other options, but the great thing about this STMR is that you can stick this on a DPS unit that doesn't really need to do a lot of setup, and then you can just go to town on the kill turn. This is really good. Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's really good on super limit burst units because they don't really have any setup. They can just sing and then go on the kill turn. The problem is SLB units cannot wear this in like the base form, so they are going to sacrifice an entire materia slot to do that. On the other hand, units like Tifa or Sephiroth that can equip this in the base form, they can sing in the base form, or like Sky is a popular unit, or Lara Croft. Yeah, they can sing this in the base form and have no reduction at all to their DPS form's damage. Overall, absolute top tier STMR, Zidane's STMR. And that being said, you only need 1 copy. So 1 copy, all you need. Don't Moogle extra copies. Cacteria's STMR is a fist weapon with magic and some killers on it. The killers are physical and magic, so beast and demon. Demon killer is pretty common. It's not really hard to gear for demons, but this can be still a good option. Beast killer, a little bit trickier. 200 magic and 20% HP. Yeah, so it's a fist weapon with magical killers. If your mage can wear fist weapons and you're using Cacteria on the party, or maybe Tifa's on the party, or Carton's on the party, this is going to usually be best in slot, unless you've got like a Rod Empower or something. But yeah, it's just a really good fist weapon, killers, high magic. I personally made 2 of these. And that being said, I don't find myself using it a super ton, just because mages are overall not the best option a lot of times. But when I do use mages, I will use this fist weapon very often on them. The value is reduced a little bit because Ymir's Fist is kind of free from the trial, and it's almost as good. It's a free quest reward. It doesn't have any killers though, so if the killers matter, this is gonna be really good. Anyway, 1 copy of Cacteria I would say is fine. 2 copies sometimes will be useful, but usually it's just excess. Pure-Hearted Vivi has the highest magic hat in the game. Again, not counting Clash of Wills. Other than Clash of Wills, highest magic hat in the game. Some flat MP, and that's it. That's it. It's just the highest magic hat in the game. So if the Clash of Wills hat or helm is in use on a different unit, this is going to usually be the mage's best in slot, because magical hats don't really have magical killers on them. So yeah, there's like no competition. So almost always your mage is just wearing whatever has the highest magic in the helm slot. That's going to almost always be Vivi's hat. So really good to have. Technically speaking, multiple copies could be useful, and for like Dark Vision's mage fights, you're gearing a whole team of mages. You're absolutely going to benefit from multiple copies of this. That being said, it's only slightly higher magic than something like Hein's hat or Creel's hat. And you've probably got a few copies of those old 7-star STMR mage helms or mage hats. So this one, while it is technically better, it's not better enough to really justify Moogling multiple copies, in my opinion. So I would say 1 copy is fine for that. Diverti's STMR is a card. It's a card. It's a throwing weapon with 164 magic and spirit and 50% LB damage. So overall, this is not really great. For Diverti himself, it's going to usually be his best in slot because he does need his Trust passive in both forms. It's better than his TMR. It's really low magic, really low spirit. And well, actually Spirit's not that low. Yeah, the thing with Spirit is most of the Spirit weapons actually cap out around like 170-ish. So it's fine on Spirit, but it's low. It's very low magic. It does give 50 LB damage. It is a throwing weapon, so Tiana, could make this more relevant going forward. Even so, still, the magic is just so low. Like, no one's really going to want to use this except for Diverti. And if you are using a throwing weapon mage, you might rather something like Wildcard Ace's TMR or Ibarra's STMR. But yeah, most mages don't use throwing weapons. The ones that do usually have a better option. So one copy of this, and that's all you really need. Corley's STMR, at the current time on Global, is absolute trash. It's technically speaking the best two-handed dark whip in the game, but a lot of problems here. For one thing, it's a whip. Whips are bad. There is no whip in peril on Global. It's locked the dark element, and it's a whip. No one uses whips. So, very, very bad weapon. That being said, in the future, we are getting the premium Dark Fiend. I've mentioned her a few times. She's a very exceptionally powerful support unit, and she does bring a 30% whip in peril. She's also a dark support, so the fact that this is locked to dark probably is not going to be a problem, and it might even be a benefit. But yeah, so when Dark Fiend comes, maybe this makes a comeback, but until that happens, and even if it does happen, we don't know if it's going to matter, but at the current time, this is just no good. Never going to use it. There you go. One copy is plenty. I would absolutely not Moogle multiple copies. Now we're getting to some Neovision's Awakens. We're going to skip Daisy. Napi's STMR is a great sword with killers on it and an auto buff. So 192 attack power, 50% Beast and Dragon Killer, and an auto cast Mighty Moogle, which is 250 attack power at the start of the battle or when you Brave Shift. Nice great sword. If the killers matter, this is gonna be very, very strong. The problem, as usual with great swords aren't that good because of the bad variants. We do now have an available greatsword in peril with the new global exclusive Vision card. Also, Cloud, Napi herself, and Tyvis can all do greatsword in perils for your team. So greatswords are certainly a lot better than they used to be. The biggest problem is just variants. And until the variants patch comes, you don't want to be using greatswords unless you have to. You'd rather be using like guns or bows or harps or whatever. But once the variants patch arrives, this will be a really good greatsword, especially if the killers apply. So against Beast and Dragon, it'll be really good. That being said, I would say one copy is fine. Like I personally would not Moogle multiple copies. Royal Puppeteer Aphma, her STMR is a fist weapon, and I mentioned it during Snow. This is the best tanking fist weapon for physical. So it's 180 defense, but it also gives 50 true double hand for defense. So, Snow's gives nothing and is lower flat. This gives 50 true double hand with a shield, and it gives 180 flat defense. It also gives 170 attack power. So if you are building a defense scaling unit for LB damage, or just damage period, like Maeve, for example, this is going to be a really good option. It is one-handed, so it doesn't get variance and all that, but it doesn't get penalized by the logarithmic formula, which is a temporary problem that's being fixed in the near future. But this is not really much more to say to it. It is the best tanking fist weapon in the game. If your tank can use fist weapons, this is really good. Really good. One copy should be plenty. Louise's STMR is a heavy armor with 50 fire resist and 110 magic power. So this is higher magic than Golbez's STMR. Golbez's STMR, I think, is like 105 or something. Very, very similar, not really much different, or maybe it's 100. So this is like a tiny, tiny upgrade over Golbez's STMR. The problem is most mages can't wear heavy armor. Louise can, but she's obviously going to want her own. But yeah, and it does have 50 fire resist, but it's such a specialized item that most mages can't wear heavy armor. And the ones that can, if you've got like two of them on a party and you've only got one copy of this, you can just give them Golbez's STMR. It's incredibly similar. It's like, this is not worth Moogling a second copy just for like 5 or 10 more flat magic. It's just really not, in my opinion. It's a great STMR, but one copy is all you really need. White Dragon Ling's STMR is a one-handed dagger with fill rate, I believe, and HP. So 150 fill rate, so that's pretty high. After the item world enchantment, it'll be 300% fill rate, which is the highest in the game. It's better than like Zaan's STMR or Rem's STMR. It's decent attack power as well. All that being said, I personally would not make multiple copies of this. One copy is fine. It's going to be Ling's best in slot versus during some builds, Ling can do the Dagger in Peril. But honestly, even though this can technically have higher fill rate, I still prefer Zaan and Rem's STMR for support units because that can enable dual wield. A lot of support units cannot dual wield naturally, so you're wasting an extra slot to give them dual wield. But even so, you could also you can mix and match like one copy of Zaan's STMR to enable dual wield, and then put this in the offhand, and you're getting overall more fill rate. So it's a good STMR. I just wouldn't make multiple copies. I think one copy of that is totally fine. Guardian Blade Charlotte's STMR is it's two. You can craft it back and forth at will. Either a two-handed greatsword with for Charlotte only, it gives her flat stats. The problem is no one is using Charlotte, so who cares about the flat stats? So it's basically just a 190 attack power greatsword. It's just inferior in every possible way to Nappi's STMR. So if you want a two-handed greatsword, get Nappi's. Nappi's is higher flat attack. Nappi's gives an auto buff. Nappi's it gives killers. This gives nothing. That being said, you can also swap it to a one-handed sword, which gives 180 attack power and 160 spirit. So, and it also gives flat stats for Charlotte versions. So I guess it could be good for Sacred Shield Charlotte as a tank. The problem is, like, Sacred Shield Charlotte is just eclipsed entirely by Beatrix. Beatrix is dramatically better at magical tanking over Sacred Shield Charlotte. So there's no reason to use Charlotte over Beatrix unless you just don't have Beatrix. So I really can't recommend this STMR. One copy is too many copies. You just don't really want it. Emperor Vlad's STMR, it's basically just like a slightly better version of Saul's STMR. It's a 184 rod, and it gives a 300% magic buff on turn 1. So this could see like really, really specialized use as like equipping on a turn 1 OTK that is not using a buffer. Other than that, no. It's just, you're never going to use this. It has no killers. It has no true dual wield. The 300 auto buff, like I said, is only ever going to matter if you're doing a turn 1 OTK with no buffers in the party. And, like, why would you even do that? Yeah. Terrible STMR. Terrible. 0 copies is plenty. Lord of the Seas, Nicole. So his STMR is a little unfortunate. It's a great killer STMR for Beast and Aquatics. The big problem is it has no offensive stats, no magic, and no attack power. That being said, I have still used this in builds, even on physical units, because Aquatic Killer is just like non-existent. So against Aquatics, this can still be worth using, even with no defense, no offensive stats. On the other hand, if you're using like a spirit damage dealer or a defense damage dealer, like for example the Chow coming out tomorrow, this might be really, really good for them because it does give spirit and defense. It also gives water resist. So yeah, that being said, it is really specialized and it's like Aquatic Killer. So I would say one copy is fine. Don't Moogle for more. I didn't Moogle for more, but if you really want to, it's your choice. But I think one copy is fine. It will see use versus Aquatics every now and then. Probably not Beast. There's better options for Beast. But it could see use every now and then. Cetra Descendant Aerith's STMR is a accessory. Really high spirit, really high, or not really high magic. It's actually low magic. Well, not low. It's just like not the highest. There's better. But it is the highest flat magic accessory in the game. That being said, I would still usually rather the 7-star Aerith's STMR. It's slightly less spirit, but it gives 60% spirit and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is just flat stats and nothing else for everyone, except for Cloud and Aerith. For them, it gives additional flat static attack, or all stats. For Cloud, if you're using Cloud, for him, Tifa's STMR is way better if you happen to have that. This is a good secondary option, but I would not personally Moogle more of these. technically speaking, it is going to be the best in slot on Aerith to have 2 of them. You could use 2 of these on Aerith if she's doing like Holy Reflect, and that might be best in slot for her. Maybe, I don't know, depends. But even so, like, Aerith as a DPS unit has really fallen out. She's not extremely relevant anymore. Like, I know she's used in Dark Visions every now and then as like a Holy Reflection strategy, but even so, I would say 1 copy of her STMR is fine. Avalanche Tifa's STMR. Now this one I went kind of crazy about. I moogled 4 of these. I've got tons of Crescent Moon Charms, and the only reason being, it is the highest flat attack accessory in the game. It is the highest by a, well, now that Arn exists, only by a tiny amount. Even so, it's higher than Arn's. Yep, if you're going for the absolute DPS build, assuming you're capping all your passives from other slots, this is going to be the highest attack power accessory in the game. That's all there is to say to it. It also gives you charm immunity, which is usually not relevant, but it can be sometimes. And then for Cloud and Tifa themselves, it gives LB damage and flat stats. So for Cloud and Tifa, always best in slot. You absolutely want 2 of these, especially on Tifa. She does stack on global. It's not super important to get like 4 copies like I did. Like, I mean, just to be honest here, I do very, very often use all 4 copies on a team, because it is the highest attack power accessory in the game. So yeah, and that it's still the highest. It's still the highest in the game, even based on current JP. So 2 copies minimum. If you really want to go for the absolute min-max, you can go for more than 2. I went for 4. 4 might be excessive, but I do use all 4 sometimes. Sephiroth's STMR. We're actually at over an hour at this point. This is going to be the last one that we're going to stop, then I'm going to come back for part 2 later. So Sephiroth's STMR is just a really high attack power clothing. I think it's the highest attack power clothing in the game, other than Clash of Wills. And it gives stop immunity. And that's pretty much it. For Sephiroth himself, it gives 500 attack. So if on Sephiroth, always best in slot. For other units, it's just the highest attack power in the game. I did make a second one of these, so I have 2 of these. That's kind of it. The chess slot is a lot more competitive, and while I will use both copies in teams relatively often, just because like the 2nd or 3rd DPS may need or may have all their passives capped out, so just the highest attack power is just the highest attack power. Still, I say 2 copies is plenty. Maybe even 1's good enough, but it's a really good chess slot. 2nd best in the game behind Clash of Wills, which is a max of 1. So yeah, minimum of 1 copy. 2 copies is useful. I do use both copies relatively often. So we're going to resume from Sky in part 2 coming in the future. Hope it's been informative. See you then.